You have probably eaten a cashew at some point in the last month, but unlike peanuts or pistachios, you have never bought one in its shell. That is because every single cashew shell is filled with a dark, corrosive liquid that burns human skin. This substance is called cashew nutshell liquid, or CNSL. It contains urushiol, the exact same compound that gives poison ivy its terrible reputation. Only in the cashew, it is concentrated enough to cause severe blistering chemical burns on contact. The part we eat isn't technically a nut, it's a seed, trapped inside that gray, toxic shell. It hangs off a swollen red stem botanists call the cashew apple. The seed dangles from the end like a strange afterthought. Almost nothing about this plant is what it appears to be. The design is a botanical booby trap meant to punish anything that tries to eat it, which raises the question of how it ever became a $10 billion global commodity. The indigenous Tupi people of northeastern Brazil were the first to bypass the acid. They discovered that roasting the shell in an open fire burns off the caustic oil, making the seed safe to extract. When Portuguese colonists arrived in the 1500s, they initially thought the seed was an inedible waste. The Tupi showed them the roasting trick, and the colonists quickly folded the crop into global trade routes. By 1560, they brought the tree here, to Goa, India. But they were not planting it for food. Goa's sandy coastline was washing away, and the Portuguese used the cashew tree's aggressive, sprawling root system as a living seawall to prevent erosion. Then, local elephants roaming the area discovered that the sweet, fleshy cashew apples hanging high in the canopy were absolutely delicious. They would eat the fruit, wander miles down the coastline, and deposit the intact seeds in their droppings. The elephants became an unpaid agricultural workforce, planting the trees up and down the Indian subcontinent. A highly localized Brazilian tree crossed an ocean for erosion control, met a hungry wildlife population, and accidentally laid the groundwork for a massive agricultural industry. Today, cashews grow across 3 continents, but human agriculture has not bred out the toxic shell. The biological barrier remains exactly the same. Getting a cashew from the tree to a grocery store requires a brutal 5-step gauntlet. The raw harvest must be sun-dried, roasted or steamed at extreme temperatures, then cracked open, baked in a low-temperature oven, and finally peeled. This photo shows how that extraction happens across much of the industry today. In places like India and parts of Africa, bypassing the acid relies heavily on intense manual labor. Workers sit in processing sheds, cracking shells open one at a time. When protective gloves are too thin or entirely absent, the caustic liquid seeps out. Repeated exposure causes severe chemical burns that crack, blister, and slowly peel the skin right off their bare hands. The severity of this depends entirely on where the processing happens. Vietnam has invested heavily in automated shelling machines, which keeps vulnerable human hands safely away from the corrosive oil. But much of the global supply still moves through unmechanized facilities, where volume is prioritized over safety. Even after defeating the outer shell, the kernels are covered in a thin skin called the testa. Workers must painstakingly peel this layer off by hand before the cashews can be graded and shipped. Sobering, the effortless convenience of grabbing a handful of nuts off the counter is subsidized by an incredibly precarious labor chain, built entirely around navigating a biological hazard. The caustic liquid that burns workers' hands is not thrown away. It has quietly become a highly lucrative industrial commodity. Because of its unique chemical properties, extracted CNSL is sold to industrial manufacturers. It is used as a base for waterproof coatings, varnishes, and, as shown in this brake assembly, friction linings for automobiles. While the global market hyper-optimizes the extraction of the seed and the acid, the massive cashew apple itself faces a totally different fate. It is overwhelmingly treated as garbage. But there are a few rare exceptions. In Goa, local communities use traditional earthen pots and copper stills, like these, to ferment discarded apples into a regional liquor called Feni. But for most of the world, the math is staggering. As this chart shows, for every ton of cashews harvested, processors extract at most 300 kilograms of edible kernels. The remaining 700 kilograms, the shell and the entire fruit, is left on the ground to rot. The apple is incredibly fragile and begins fermenting within hours, so it cannot survive transport. And because raw African cashews are usually shipped thousands of miles to Asia for processing, the fruit is completely abandoned at the source. We treat it like any other snack on the shelf. But every cashew you eat is a botanical oddity, a discovery by indigenous farmers, the routes of colonial empires, and grueling human labor, just to safely reach your mouth.